The sun beat down on the Afghan valley with a merciless glare, the kind of heat that pressed into your skin until even the air felt heavy. Dust lifted with every turn of the convoy's Humvee tires, trailing like smoke against the jagged mountains. To most, it was just another stretch of dirt road, winding between barren slopes that looked lifeless from a distance. But to the men inside the convoy, it was enemy country silent, waiting and always dangerous. Inside the lead vehicle, Sergeant First Class Daniels adjusted his helmet and scanned the ridges through dust-coated glasses. He'd been here before, dozens of times, and the feeling never changed. The silence wasn't peace. It was warning. He keyed his radio. "Stay sharp, boys. I don't like this stretch." Behind him, Private Miller gripped his rifle tighter, his 19-year-old hands damp with sweat. "It's too quiet," he muttered. His squad leader gave a short laugh. "Kid, you watch too many movies. Quiet's good." But Daniels didn't laugh. His gut told him otherwise. High above them, hidden against the rocks in a ghillie suit that blended with the dirt and scrub, Staff Sergeant Emily Carter had the same thought. She lay prone, cheek pressed against the stock of her M2010 sniper rifle, watching the valley through her scope. From her position, she had a perfect line of sight to the road below. Her assignment was clear: recon only, observe, report, no engagement unless directly compromised. For hours she had watched the barren ridges, scanning for movement, for the glint of a scope, for shadows slipping where none should be. And for hours, nothing. But Carter's instincts told her something was wrong. Valleys like this didn't stay quiet out of kindness. Through her earpiece, she heard the convoy chatter. Casual, routine, tinged with the underlying tension that every soldier carried on patrol. She adjusted her scope and swept the far ridge again. Just rocks, just shadows. And yet her stomach tightened. The first shot came without warning. It wasn't a single crack, but a thunderous eruption, an RPG launched from a cave mouth high above. The rocket hissed down, slamming into the dirt just ahead of the convoy, erupting in flame and dust. The Humvee screeched to a halt as soldiers scrambled for cover. Then the valley erupted in full. Gunfire poured from hidden openings along the cliffs, muzzle flashes spitting from rocks that seconds earlier looked dead. The air filled with the metallic scream of bullets tearing across the road. Ambush! Contact left and right. Someone shouted over the radio, voice cracking with panic. The convoy scattered to defensive positions, rifles barking upward, but the sheer volume of enemy fire was overwhelming. Insurgents, dozens of them, poured out of caves and firing positions, disciplined and coordinated. Machine guns rattled from the ridges, cutting down into the trapped vehicles. An RPG slammed into the last Humvee in line, flipping it onto its side in a fireball. The men inside had no chance. Carter's scope zoomed in on the chaos. Her jaw tightened. She could see the insurgents moving, disciplined and fast, like they had rehearsed this ambush for weeks. Her orders screamed in her head: observe, report, do not engage. She reached for her comms. Command, this is Overwatch 3. Convoy ambushed, multiple hostiles from both ridges, heavy weapons in play. Request immediate support. Static, and a calm but strained voice replied, acknowledged, Overwatch 3. Quick reaction force deploying. Hold position. Do not compromise your location. Carter exhaled slowly, heaping her cheek against the rifle stock. Hold position. Watch them die. She swallowed hard. Below, the soldiers were pinned down, firing blindly, outgunned and outnumbered. Through her scope, she saw a young private pressed against a burning Humvee, hands over his head as rounds sparked inches above him. His radio was on, voice breaking. We're pinned down. We need backup now. Another explosion ripped through the convoy. A second RPG hit, shattering the windshield of the lid truck. Screams echoed across the valley, carried up the ridge like ghosts. Carter shifted, scanning for leadership among the insurgents. She spotted one, a man waving his arm, directing fighters into flanking positions. Her finger hovered over the trigger. One shot, and she could change the tempo. But one shot, and she'd expose herself. Then the mortar began. A dull thump echoed from the ridge opposite hers. A second later, the earth around the convoy erupted in smoke and fire. The insurgents weren't just ambushing. They had heavy support. Mortar rained onto the valley floor, forcing the soldiers to dive for what little cover they could find. The radio crackled with desperation. "Call the SEALs. We're not gonna last out here." Carter froze at the words. The SEALs were the quick reaction force, but they were miles away. Even at full speed, they wouldn't be here for minutes that felt like lifetimes. She could hear the panic in the soldiers' voices. Men she didn't even know. Men trapped in that kill zone with no way out. From her perch, Carter had the best vantage in the valley. She could see the enemy clearly, their positions, their movements. Through her scope, one insurgent reloaded an RPG, aiming for the next Humvee. Her rifle followed the motion, sight steady, finger pressing lightly against the trigger. Her training screamed against it. Orders were drilled into her. Snipers on recon do not reveal themselves. She was a ghost, unseen, a set of eyes, not a weapon. But as she watched the insurgent take aim, saw the soldiers scrambling helplessly below, something inside her snapped. She whispered under her breath, steady and low, "Not today." Her finger tightened. The rifle cracked, echoing like thunder off the rocks. The insurgent collapsed, the RPG clattering harmlessly to the ground. And in that instant, everything changed. The valley shifted. Soldiers below, stunned for a heartbeat, realized someone was watching over them. "Sniper." One shouted into the radio, "We've got cover." For the first time since the ambush began, hope sparked in the chaos. But Carter knew what would happen next. The insurgents would find her. They'd turn their guns uphill, and the ridge she lay on would become the most dangerous ground in Afghanistan. She pulled back the bolt, chambered another round, and whispered to herself the words that would carry her through the fight. "Stay sharp. Emily, stay alive." The battle for the valley had only just begun. Emily Carter steadied her breathing as the dust cloud from her first shot drifted into the hot valley air. Through her scope, she watched the RPG gunner's body slump sideways, the rocket tumbling harmlessly to the ground. For a single heartbeat, the battlefield froze. American soldiers in the kill zone dared to look upward. Enemy fighters blinked in surprise, and the silence carried a sharp edge of disbelief. Then everything roared back to life. "Sniper! Sniper on the ridge!" Insurgents screamed in Pashto, their voices carried by the dry wind. Muzzle flashes erupted in her direction, bullets whining past her ears and sparking off stone. Carter pressed herself flat, heart pounding, yet her hands remained steady on the rifle. She had crossed the line now. There was no going back. The order had been clear: observe, report, stay hidden. But Carter was no longer just eyes on the ridge. She had declared herself a player in the fight. And now she was the enemy's priority target. Below her, the convoy scrambled. Soldiers dove for cover, some firing upward, others dragging the wounded behind armored doors. She could hear them over the radio, voices thick with adrenaline and fear. "Where's that fire coming from?" Top ridge, friendly sniper." "She's covering us, boys, move, move." The knowledge that her presence mattered, that she wasn't just a ghost anymore, ignited something inside her. She adjusted her scope, finding another insurgent preparing to fire into the valley. Crack! Her second round dropped him before he could squeeze the trigger. The Americans below shouted with renewed energy. "She's taking them out. Hold the line." Carter forced herself to stay calm. Her sniper training had drilled into her. Every movement must be deliberate, every shot calculated. She wasn't there to spray fire like a grunt with an M4. She was a scalpel. Precision meant survival, not just for her, but for everyone trapped in the kill zone. Hours earlier, before the ambush, her assignment had felt simple, almost routine. She remembered the Black Hawk insertion rotors chopping against the dawn sky as she was dropped into the jagged ridgeline. She'd hiked into position alone, her ghillie suit heavy on her shoulders, rifle balanced against her chest. Recon missions were lonely, but Carter never minded solitude. She liked the quiet. It gave her time to think, to disappear into the landscape, to watch without being watched. "Overwatch 3, confirm position," Command had asked once she settled. "Overwatch 3 in position. Line of sight to Valley Road. All clear." Her job was eyes. Nothing more. But in war, nothing more could turn into everything in a heartbeat. Now, lying in the same spot hours later, she realized how thin the line was between observer and executioner. Incoming fire tore her from her thoughts. A spray of rounds chewed into the rocks just inches from her head. Shards of stone cut across her cheek, warm blood trickling down her face. Carter didn't flinch. She rolled sideways, sliding down a few feet, and set up behind a new boulder. Through the scope, she spotted the source, a machine gun nest dug into the ridge across from her, cutting off the convoy's only chance to maneuver. She adjusted her breathing, slowed her heart, and squeezed the trigger. One shot. The gunner jerked backward. Another insurgent rushed to grab the weapon. Second shot. He crumpled beside the first. The machine gun fell silent. Down below, Sergeant Daniels barked orders, rallying his men. "She's clearing the ridge shift fire left. Take advantage." The Americans surged, finally able to reposition. Carter chambered another round, her rifle hot against her shoulder. She whispered the words she always did in moments like this, words no one else would ever hear. One shot, one life saved. But the enemy adapted quickly. Mortar fire shifted, this time targeting her ridge. The first impact landed 20 meters away, the explosion rattling her bones. Dust and smoke rolled over her position, choking the air. Carter crawled low, dragging her rifle, keeping herself hidden beneath the jagged rocks. Another mortar slammed closer, showering her with fragments. A jagged shard cut into her forearm, blood seeping into her glove. She gritted her teeth, checked her weapon. Still intact. Still functional. That was all that mattered. The insurgents wanted her gone, and they were willing to waste ammunition to do it. Every shot she fired pulled more attention, but every second she stayed alive meant another soldier in the convoy survived. Her earpiece crackled. "Overwatch 3, what's your status?" Command demanded. Carter wiped grit from her mouth, voice steady despite the chaos. Still in position, engaging, convoy pinned, multiple casualties. SEALs inbound? QRF en route, ETA 5 mics. 5 minutes. Carter's eyes narrowed. 5 minutes was an eternity in a kill zone. She peered through the scope again. An insurgent squad was attempting to flank, moving along the ridgeline toward the convoy's rear. She lined up her sights, exhaled, and fired. One man dropped. The others scattered, hesitating just long enough for the Americans below to adjust their fire. Her radio buzzed again, this time from the convoy itself. "Sniper on the ridge, this is Bravo 2. Whoever you are, keep doing what you're doing. You're saving our asses." Carter allowed herself the faintest smile. "Copy that," she whispered. though she never pressed the mic. She didn't need them to know her name. She had been in Afghanistan for 3 tours, each more brutal than the last. She had seen villages torn apart, men she'd trained beside lowered into flag-draped coffins, and civilians caught between fire lines with no chance to escape. Through it all, she had learned one lesson. Orders mattered, but lives mattered more. Now, pinned under mortar fire, Carter knew she had chosen the harder path. She could have stayed hidden, reported the ambush, and waited for the SEALs. If she had, the convoy below would already be gone, wiped out before help arrived. She couldn't let that happen. Not when her rifle could shift the balance. Through her scope, she spotted another insurgent climbing onto a ridge boulder, hauling a long tube onto his shoulder. Her blood ran cold. Another RPG, aimed at the convoy's last remaining vehicle. Her body reacted faster than thought. She adjusted the crosshairs, centered them on his chest, and fired. A man toppled backward, the rocket clattering uselessly into the dirt. The convoy below cheered, voices rising even over the firefight. "She's still got us covered." "Hold on." But Carter didn't celebrate. She chambered another round, eyes scanning, always scanning. There would be another RPG, another mortar, another machine gun. She had to stay ahead. The minutes dragged like hours. Bullets carved the air around her. Mortar hammered the ridge, forcing her to move again and again. Sweat stung her eyes, blood slicked her forearm, and her ammo count dropped with every shot. Yet she never faltered. Every pull of the trigger was a decision. Every decision a lifeline. Somewhere in the chaos, she heard it again over the radio. "Call the SEALs? Call the SEALs." She gritted her teeth. The SEALs were coming. But until they arrived, she was the only shield these men had. And she wasn't going to let the valley claim them. She whispered once more into the dust and smoke, words meant only for herself. "You're not alone. Not while I'm up here." And with that, Emily Carter, the lone Overwatch, settled back into the scope, her rifle roaring once more from the ridge. The valley burned. Smoke billowed from the wreckage of 2 destroyed Humvees, black plumes curling into the sky as if the mountains themselves were exhaling war. The sound was relentless rifle fire hammering, machine guns rattling, mortar thumping, and the desperate cries of wounded men echoing across the rocks. Staff Sergeant Emily Carter lay flat on the ridge, the butt of her rifle pressed tight into her bruised shoulder, eyes locked into the scope. She had dropped 5 targets already, each one a critical threat: the RPG gunner, the machine gunner, the flanking fighter, but it barely dented the swarm below. For every enemy that fell, 2 more seemed to take his place. The Americans in the convoy were cornered, boxed in by cliffs, their vehicles trapped in the kill zone. They needed help, and they needed it yesterday. Miles away, inside a forward operating base, a different battle was unfolding. Radios screamed with overlapping voices as officers scrambled to make sense of the reports flooding in. Convoy ambushed in Sector 4. Taking heavy fire, multiple casualties. Requesting air support immediately. The commander on duty, Lieutenant Colonel Harris, slammed his fist against the operations table. He was a veteran of too many firefights to panic now, but the urgency in the reports tightened his chest. The insurgents had planned this well. Too well. "Where's my QRF?" Harris barked. "SEAL team stationed south. Sir, gearing up now." "ETA 7 minutes by hello." 7 minutes? Harris cursed under his breath. Those boys don't have 7 minutes. Back in the valley, the voices of the trapped soldiers filled the comms, raw and desperate. "This is Bravo 2. We're cut off. We can't move. Where's the air support? We need CAS now. Call the SEALs. For God's sake, call the SEALs." The last voice cracked, half scream, half plea. Carter heard it through her earpiece as she crawled to a new firing position, dirt grinding under her elbows. Her pulse slowed, not from calm, but from deadly focus. She could picture the soldier on the other end of that radio sweat-streak, eyes wide, clutching his rifle with white-knuckled hands, praying someone would hear him. Carter adjusted her scope. She saw insurgents repositioning with frightening discipline. One squad shifted behind boulders. Another dragged a mortar tube into better range. They weren't just trying to pin the convoy. They were trying to erase it. She whispered to herself, steady as ever. Not while I'm still breathing. Crack. One mortar operator collapsed. Crack. The second man fell beside him. The mortar tube lay silent, harmless for now. Still, Carter knew the truth. She was only buying time. Her earpiece came alive again. Overwatch 3 command. SEAL QRF airborne. ETA 5 mics. Do not compromise further. Stay concealed? Stay concealed? She nearly laughed. Her cover had been blown the moment her first shot rang out. The enemy was already hunting her. Mortar pounded the ridge, bullets shredded the rocks around her, and still, command wanted her to wait. She keyed her mic, voice clipped but controlled. Command, be advised. Convoy will not survive 5 minutes without immediate suppression. They're exposed and losing ground fast. The reply came after a tense pause. Overwatch 3, acknowledge orders. Hold. SEALs will finish this fight. Carter gritted her teeth. Hold. That word burned. Below her, men screamed in agony, fighting for their lives. She wasn't going to let them bleed out waiting for help. The convoy itself was unraveling. Sergeant Daniels, crouched behind the engine block of a shattered Humvee, barked into his radio. Bravo 2 to command, where's my backup? SEALs inbound, hold position, came the tinny response. Daniels spat into the dirt. Hold position? We're dying here. He glanced at the men around him. Miller, the 19-year-old kid with shaking hands, Corporal Ross clutching a bleeding leg, Staff Sergeant Vega reloading with grim determination. Their eyes darted upward to the ridge. Every time Carter's rifle cracked, a small gap opened in the storm of fire, a precious few seconds to breathe. She's keeping us alive, Ross muttered, voice hoarse. Who is she? Miller asked. Doesn't matter, Danielle snapped. All that matters is she's ours. Hold on, boys. Just hold on. The insurgents were furious now, realizing a lone sniper was unraveling their ambush. Carter saw them gesturing wildly, pointing up at her ridge. Gunfire concentrated in her direction. Every muzzle flashed like a spotlight aimed at her position. She shifted again, crawling low, dragging her rifle to a new angle. Sweat trickled down her back beneath the suffocating ghillie suit. Her muscles burned, her arm throbbed from the earlier shrapnel wound, but her eyes never left the scope. She spotted their leader, the same man she had seen earlier, barking orders, rallying fighters. He stood tall on a boulder, waving his arm to direct more men forward. Carter steadied her breath, lined up the crosshairs, and fired. The leader dropped instantly, his body tumbling down the rock. Confusion rippled through the insurgents as their momentum faltered. The convoy seized the chance, rifles blazing upward, shouts of defiance cutting through the chaos. For the first time, the Americans weren't just surviving, they were fighting back. Still, the battle was far from won. Carter's ammo was running low. She checked her magazine. 7 rounds left. 7 rounds against dozens of enemies. Her rifle was her lifeline, but it couldn't hold out forever. SEALs, where the hell are you? She muttered. She thought back to her training. Snipers were taught patience, endurance, the art of invisibility. But no training could prepare her for this being the thin line between life and death for an entire unit. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be the hero. And yet, fate had thrown her onto this ridge at the exact moment when everything depended on her. Her comms buzzed again. The SEAL team leader's voice came through, sharp and calm. "This is Viper 1. We're 5 clicks out. Hold tight. We're coming. Hold tight." Again, that word. Carter didn't have the luxury of holding. The insurgents, desperate to silence her, tried a new tactic. Through her scope, she saw 2 fighters dragging a child-sized figure forward, using him as a human shield as they advanced. Carter's stomach clenched. A boy, no older than 12, trembling in their grasp. Her finger froze on the trigger. The rules of engagement were clear: no civilians. She shifted, searching for a clean shot. For agonizing seconds, she tracked their movements, heart pounding. Then, a Flash 1 fighter stepped slightly aside, exposing his chest. Carter didn't hesitate. Crack. He went down. The boy stumbled free, sprinting toward the rocks. The second fighter raised his rifle to shoot him. Crack. Carter's bullet struck before he could fire. She exhaled, the tension leaving her chest in a sharp rush. Another life saved. Another decision she'd carry forever. The convoy roared with renewed fire, the Americans pushing back, holding their line. The insurgents were still strong, but their cohesion was slipping. Every second Carter held them at bay was another second closer to salvation. Above the battlefield, faint at first, then growing louder, came the thundering rotors of helicopters. Dust swirled in the valley, and heads turned skyward. Relief surged through the convoy like electricity. "The SEALs are here!" Daniels shouted, voice raw but triumphant. Carter allowed herself the briefest smile, though she never looked away from her scope. The fight wasn't over yet. Not until the SEALs hit the ground. Not until the valley was clear. Not until every one of those soldiers below was out alive. She whispered the words that had carried her this far. "Stay sharp, Emily. Stay alive." And with her last rounds ready, she prepared to cover the SEALs' arrival. The world had narrowed to the circle of Emily Carter's scope. The ridge beneath her vibrated with the pounding of enemy mortar, and the air stank of burning fuel and blood carried upward from the valley. Through her crosshairs, she tracked a heavy machine gun crew, spitting death into the convoy below. The weapon's rhythm was relentless tat-tat-tat, chewing through steel and flesh alike. Every round that slammed into the convoy's position was another soldier closer to death. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger. Her body was still, her breathing controlled. She whispered the mantra that had carried her through years of training. Exhale. Focus. Press. Crack. The bullet tore through the gunner's chest, flinging him back from the weapon. For an instant, silence filled that corner of the battlefield. Soldiers below looked upward, startled. One of them raised a fist into the air, pointing to the ridge. "Sniper! Friendly sniper!" He shouted. The convoy, broken and desperate, had just found a thread of hope. But Carter wasn't done. The loader scrambled to take the dead man's place, fumbling to grip the heavy weapon. Carter shifted a hair, steadied her sights, and squeezed again. Crack! The second man collapsed across the steel, his blood soaking the hot barrel. The machine gun lay still, silent at last. From below, a ragged cheer erupted short, breathless, but fierce. It wasn't victory. It was survival, bought second by second from the barrel of Carter's rifle. She pulled back the bolt, chambering another round, and rolled to a new angle. Sniper doctrine was clear: never fire twice from the same position. The moment she pulled the trigger, she had painted a target on her own back. Mortar fire would adjust, machine gunners would scan the ridge, and every insurgent with a rifle would want her dead. Already she could hear it, shouts in Pashto, desperate and angry. The enemy was pointing, shifting, calling her out. Rounds zipped past her position, slamming into rocks, kicking up shards of stone. One round ricocheted so close she felt the air slap her cheek. She pressed herself flatter into the earth, grit grinding against her skin, and dragged her rifle forward. Through her scope, she found her next target. An insurgent crouched low with an RPG balanced on his shoulder. He was aiming for the convoy's last remaining vehicle. If it went up, the soldiers inside had nowhere left to hide. Her pulse slowed. The world blurred until only the crosshairs remained. Crack! The fighter dropped backward, the RPG skittering harmlessly into the dirt. Another ragged shout of relief broke out from the valley. "Whoever that sniper is," Sergeant Daniels growled over the convoy's comms, "we owe them our lives. Use the cover. Move positions." The Americans shifted, dragging wounded comrades into shallow ditches, spreading out their fire. They weren't winning, but they weren't being slaughtered anymore. The difference was Carter. Inside the ridgeline, insurgent leaders raged. Their perfect ambush was unraveling because of one hidden shooter. They barked orders, gesturing for mortar to shift fire, for riflemen to sweep the ridge. Carter spotted them moving, coordinated and ruthless, fanning out to flush her from cover. "Come on, then," she whispered, rolling to another boulder. Her cheek pressed against the stock. Her scope found its mark, another leader with a radio, calling out directions. She squeezed the trigger. Crack! He spun and crumpled. She didn't linger to watch. She rolled, scrambled, found another spot, chambered another round. The ridge was alive with fire now, rounds sparking around her, mortar shaking the earth. But Carter was untouchable, a ghost slipping from shadow to shadow, her rifle barking death every time she paused. The convoy below felt it. For the first time since the ambush began, they could breathe. "Snipers clearing us a path," Daniels yelled. "Suppressive fire, let's take advantage." Corporal Ross, wounded but still in the fight, leaned against a door frame and squeezed off bursts toward the enemy ridge. Young Private Miller, still trembling, shouted into his comms, "We've got a guardian angel up there." Guardian angel. Carter heard the words through the static and allowed herself the faintest smile. She wasn't supposed to be their savior, just their eyes in the sky. But fate had made its choice. The insurgents redoubled their assault, enraged now. Mortar slammed closer, rocks exploding into shards. A fragment sliced across Carter's leg, hot pain flaring. She hissed but didn't flinch. She dragged herself a few feet lower, ignoring the blood, and raised her rifle again. She was running out of ammo, she knew it, counted every shot. She couldn't waste a single round. Each pull of the trigger had to matter. Each one had to carve open another breath of survival for the soldiers. Below, crack. A spotter fell. Crack. A runner with ammunition went down. Crack. Another RPG never fired. 3 lives, 3 more seconds. Her radio buzzed again with Command's voice, tense but calm. "Overwatch 3. SEALs are en route. 3 minutes out. Hold position. 3 minutes." Carter's jaw tightened. In 3 minutes, the convoy could be gone. She checked her magazine. Only 4 rounds left. 4 lives she could save before her rifle went silent. She didn't think of herself. She thought of the men below, their terrified faces pressed into dirt, their bodies trembling with fatigue and fear. She thought of the young private who couldn't be older than her youngest cousin, hiding behind a burning Humvee. She thought of the voices screaming, "Call the SEALs," like it was a prayer. And she thought of the silence that would follow if she failed. "No," she whispered, chambering her next round. "Not while I'm breathing." The next shot was the hardest yet. Through her scope, she saw 2 insurgents flanking the convoy from the east, their rifles trained on the exposed wounded. She adjusted, found her mark, and fired. Crack. One man dropped. The second froze, stunned. For a moment, Carter thought he might retreat. Then his rifle snapped upward, aiming directly at the helpless wounded. Her finger pressed again. Crack! He collapsed, his weapon clattering uselessly to the rocks. Below, the soldiers roared with relief. For the first time, the ambush felt less like a slaughter and more like a fight they might just survive. Carter ducked as a mortar struck dangerously close, the blast hurling dirt and rock across her face. She coughed, ears ringing, head pounding. Her vision swam, but she forced herself steady. The rifle was still in her hands, still ready. She crawled to her final firing position, set her cheek to the stock, and whispered, "One more." Her crosshairs found a machine gunner setting up again, his weapon ready to rain fire on the convoy. She steadied her breath, pressed the trigger, and fired. Crack! The gunner fell, his weapon clattering silent. It was the break the convoy needed. Push, push now. Daniels bellowed. The Americans surged, taking advantage of the gap. They dragged their wounded, shifted to better cover, and unleashed a wall of fire toward the ridges. The insurgents hesitated, momentum broken, their perfect ambush crumbling piece by piece. And above it all, Carter lay bleeding, exhausted, her magazine nearly empty, but her rifle had changed the battle. She knew the fight wasn't over. The insurgents would come harder now, more desperate, more furious. But she had given the convoy a chance. The first break in the storm had come from her scope, her finger, her will. She whispered once more to herself, words lost in the chaos below. They're going to make it. And as she chambered her next round, she prepared to face the valley's deadly answer. The valley had gone from a storm of chaos to something far more focused vengeance. For the first time since the ambush began, the insurgents understood why their trap hadn't finished the Americans. They had expected panic to consume the convoy, expected their machine guns and mortar to cut down every soldier before help could arrive. But someone had intervened. Someone unseen, high on the ridge, had pulled the teeth from their assault. And now every rifle, every mortar, every furious scream was aimed at her. Emily Carter pressed flat against the earth, lungs burning as dust swirled from the latest explosion. Rocks and dirt showered down over her ghillie suit, leaving her looking less like a human being and more like part of the mountain itself. Her ears rang, a high-pitched scream from the concussive force of mortar. She blinked grit from her eyes and checked her rifle, brushing off pebbles. The weapon was hot, its barrel smudged black with carbon, but still operational. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard it the shift in fire. The mortar weren't hammering the convoy anymore. They were zeroing in on her. "Damn it," she muttered. "They figured me out." Below, the convoy was holding, but only just. With the machine gunners neutralized, Daniels and his men were able to pull the wounded back and establish overlapping fields of fire. But their survival was a thin thread, fraying by the second. They didn't see Carter's world turning into hell above them. She inched forward, trying to relocate before the next barrage. The doctrine drilled into her bones was clear. Move. Always move. A sniper's deadliest mistake was predictability. But the insurgents weren't ordinary targets. They were coordinated, firing blindly across the ridgeline in sweeping arcs. Bullets hissed overhead, striking sparks from the rocks. Carter crawled to a new position, heart hammering, each scrape of her body against the stone echoing louder in her own mind than the explosions around her. She rolled behind a boulder, propped her rifle, and scanned through her scope. She found them immediately, 3 insurgents climbing, their rifles trained upward, advancing directly toward her perch. Her breath steadied. Crack. One fell backward, tumbling down the slope. Crack. The second pitched forward, his weapon slipping from his hands. The third froze, ducked behind a rock. Carter shifted her scope, searching for him, waiting for movement. Instead, she felt the ridge shake beneath her as another mortar round slammed nearby. Shards of stone ripped across her face, cutting a line along her cheek. Blood trickled warm down her jaw, but she kept her focus, scanning, waiting. The third insurgent popped up, spraying fire. Carter didn't hesitate. Crack. He collapsed. But every shot she fired drew more fire in return. It was as if the entire valley had turned its eyes upward, trying to rip her from the rock with sheer volume of firepower. The insurgents shouted to each other, their voices carrying, "Sniper! Sniper on the ridge!" Their rage was palpable, an animal sound of frustration. She'd embarrassed them, undone their perfect trap, and they would not forgive it. Carter ducked lower as a wave of bullets shredded the rock inches above her head. Splinters rained down, cutting into her arms. She gritted her teeth, clenched her jaw, and pressed tighter into the earth. She was bleeding from 3 different places now. Her shoulder burned from shrapnel, her leg throbbed from the earlier wound, and now her cheek was raw. But she kept her rifle steady. Pain was background noise. The only sound that mattered was the steady rhythm of her breathing, the cold precision of her scope. Through the haze of smoke and dust, she spotted a new threat, a mortar team setting up again on the far side of the ridge. If they got their angle right, they could wipe out the convoy in seconds. Her heart clenched. She checked her magazine, just 2 rounds left. 2 shots. 2 lives. No room for error. She steadied herself, lined up on the man adjusting the mortar tube, and fired. Crack. He spun backward, dead before he hit the dirt. The loader froze, panic flashing across his face as he scrambled to grab the tube. Carter shifted, fired again. Crack. The second man collapsed. The mortar lay useless, the threat gone for now. Her magazine clicked empty. Carter ejected it, hands moving fast but careful. She had one last mag half full. Maybe 10 rounds, give or take. 10 bullets to hold back an army. She slammed it into place and checked her combs. The radio buzzed weakly, static drowning half the words, but she caught the important part. Seals 2 minutes out. Hold position. Repeat, 2 minutes. 2 minutes. It might as well have been 2 hours. Carter looked back down the slope. The convoy was still alive, soldiers firing in tight bursts, ducking behind twisted wrecks of their vehicles. Smoke and fire choked the air. Some of the men were dragging their wounded deeper into cover, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. They were alive because of her, but that meant nothing if she couldn't keep it up. The insurgents weren't slowing. They were swarming now, dozens of them, converging on the ridgeline. Carter could see them weaving between rocks, climbing with deadly intent. They weren't just trying to flush her out. They wanted her dead, and they were willing to spend lives to make it happen. Her scope found one climber, then another. Crack, crack. 2 fell, tumbling backward. Another muzzle flash from below. She jerked her head down instinctively, and a round whizzed overhead, so close she felt the heat of its passage. She pressed into the rock, heart hammering, before peeking back out. Her scope aligned on the shooter. Crack. He was gone. But the pressure was constant, unrelenting. For every one she dropped, 2 more seemed to appear. She was fighting a tide, each wave higher than the last. Her breath came ragged now, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her arms ached from the recoil, her eyes burned from the dust, and still she fought. Each shot was a lifeline thrown to the men below, each one another step closer to the SEAL's arrival. Another climber crested the ridge too close, less than 50 meters. Carter didn't have time for the scope. She swung her rifle, aimed by instinct, and fired. The man dropped, sliding back down the slope with a scream. Her heart thundered in her chest. She pulled the bolt, chambered again, swung back to long range. "Stay with me," she whispered. She didn't know if she was talking to herself, her rifle, or the convoy. Maybe all three. The ridge shook again, another mortar. This one close enough that the blast lifted her off the ground and slammed her back down. Her ears roared, her vision blurred, and for a moment she couldn't feel her hands. She blinked hard, tasted blood, and forced herself to focus. Her rifle was still there. She clutched it like a lifeline. Her scope cleared, and she saw them. A wave of insurgents, 15 or more, pouring from the caves, rushing the convoy in a desperate push. This was it. The last surge before the SEALs arrived. If the convoy broke now, all of this was for nothing. Carter's hands steadied. Her breathing slowed. Crack. One fell. Crack. Another dropped. Crack. A third collapsed mid-run. Her rifle roared, again and again, until the barrel smoked and her magazine ran dry. She ejected it, jammed the last rounds from her pouch into place, and kept firing. Every shot was pain. Every shot was defiance. The valley was screaming, burning, collapsing around her, but Emily Carter held the line. And then, above it all, came the sound she had been waiting for, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. The SEALs were almost there, but Carter wasn't done. Not yet. She pressed her cheek to the stock one more time, sighted in on the last fighter charging the convoy, and whispered, "Not today." Crack. The man fell, his weapon slipping from his hands. Carter exhaled, sweat dripping down her face, her body trembling with exhaustion. The valley had answered back with everything it had, and she was still alive. Barely. Now it was time for the cavalry. The valley had become a furnace. Emily Carter's chest rose and fell in shallow gasps as she pressed tighter against the ridge. Her body was battered, bleeding from half a dozen cuts and burns, but her mind was a steel wire, stretched taut. Every nerve screamed at her to stop, to collapse, to let go. But she kept moving. She had to, because below her, the convoy still lived. Through her scope, she saw them clinging to survival men crouched behind shattered Humvees, faces streaked with grime and fear, dragging wounded comrades out of fire. Smoke billowed upward from burning wreckage. The Americans were holding, but just barely. Carter's magazine was nearly empty again. She ran her fingers over the pouch at her belt. Only a few rounds left. She felt the familiar pit of dread open in her gut, but she shoved it down. This wasn't about her anymore. If she quit now, the convoy would fall before help arrived. She forced her breathing steady, chambered around, and whispered to herself, 2 minutes. Just give them 2 more minutes. The radio crackled at her side, distorted but alive. Overwatch 3, this is command. SEALs inbound DT in 90 seconds. Sit tight. Repeat, 90 seconds. 90 seconds. 90 more seconds of hell. Carter allowed herself a single sharp exhale. 90 seconds wasn't survival, it was eternity. She clenched her jaw and pressed her cheek against the rifle stock. Through the haze, she spotted them. Insurgents regrouping, organizing for another charge. She counted at least 12, spreading in 2 lines, moving low. They weren't retreating. They were pressing harder. They knew the convoy was weak, knew the window was closing. She adjusted her scope, tracked the lead fighter, and fired. Crack. He dropped. The line faltered, but didn't stop. Crack. Another fell, clutching his chest. Her magazine clicked empty. Carter pulled back, ejecting the mag, fingers scrambling through her pouch. She slid in the last one. She had 5 rounds. 5 bullets left. That was all. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from exhaustion. She flexed them once, twice, then settled her grip. Her voice rasped as she whispered, 5 shots. Make them count. She lined up again. Crack. A fighter crumpled. Crack. Another froze mid-sprint, collapsing into the dirt. 3 rounds left. Bullets whizzed past her ridge, striking sparks from stone. Dust exploded around her as a mortar landed close, showering her with fragments. One shard tore across her side, searing pain ripping through her ribs. She hissed, but didn't flinch. She shifted to her left elbow, ignoring the blood soaking through her uniform, and sighted again. Crack. A man with an RPG fell, his weapon clattering uselessly away. 2 rounds left. Below, the Americans were shouting, seizing the moment. They're breaking. Push them back. Daniels roared. His men rose in unison, unleashing fire toward the retreating shapes. For the first time in an hour, the convoy wasn't only surviving, it was fighting. But the insurgents weren't finished. A second wave surged from the caves, a desperate last gamble before reinforcements could arrive. Carter counted at least 20, pouring down the slope like shadows. Her pulse thundered. 2 bullets left against 20 fighters. She inhaled, steadying. Through her scope, she picked the lead man, sighted center mass, and fired. Crack. He dropped, tumbling. 1 round left. Carter froze for half a heartbeat, staring through the scope at the chaos below. She thought of her training, the countless hours on the range, the lessons drilled into her until they were instinct. A sniper shot is not just a bullet, it's a choice. She scanned the horde, looking not for the nearest, but for the greatest threat. Her scope settled on a man sprinting with another RPG, his eyes locked on the convoy's last Humvee. If he fired, half the Americans would die instantly. Carter's breathing slowed. Her world narrowed. She pressed the trigger. Crack. The insurgent collapsed, the RPG rolling harmlessly into the dirt. Her rifle clicked empty. Silence filled her ears, louder than the gunfire around her. Her rifle was dry. She had nothing left. For the first time, panic pricked at the edges of her mind. She patted her pouches, desperate, knowing they were empty. She could hear the insurgents shouting, pressing forward, their gunfire intensifying. Without her shots to break their advance, they surged toward the convoy again. Her breath hitched. She pressed her forehead against the rifle stock, teeth gritted. Come on. Come on. Where the hell are you? And then she heard it, the distant thrum, faint at first, but growing louder. Vibrating through the air, rotors. The sound grew until it drowned out even the roar of battle. Helicopters. The SEALs had arrived. Carter lifted her head, squinting through smoke. 2 Black Hawks swept low over the valley, rotors whipping dust into violent spirals. Sunlight flashed off their armored sides. From their doors, gunners unleashed streams of fire, cutting into the insurgents with merciless precision. The enemy froze, caught between fury and fear. The perfect ambush they had orchestrated was unraveling before their eyes. Ropes dropped from the hovering Black Hawks, and figures descended black-clad, armored, weapons slung across their chests. Navy SEALs, moving with lethal efficiency, landing in tight groups and peeling off into cover. Their boots hit the ground like a hammer blow of inevitability. The battlefield had shifted. From her ridge, Carter watched as the SEALs spread out, unleashing controlled bursts, each shot deliberate, each movement flawless. They advanced with ruthless precision, driving the insurgents back step by step. Where Carter had bought seconds with her rifle, the SEALs were buying survival in minutes. Her body slumped with relief. The weight crushing her chest eased slightly. She was still alive. The convoy was still alive. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Carter ejected her empty magazine and reached for her sidearm. It wasn't much, just a pistol with a half-full mag, but it was better than nothing. If the enemy reached her ridge, she'd fight with that. If they got closer still, she'd fight with her knife. She would not be taken. Bullets still ripped past her position, some fighters desperate enough to try and silence her, even with helicopters overhead. Carter pressed low, crawling to a new vantage point. She couldn't fire anymore, but she could still spot. She keyed her radio, voice hoarse but steady. Overwatch 3 to SEAL Team's insurgents regrouping near the East Ridge, 30 meters below the caves. RPGs in play. Marking targets now. Her words carried, and seconds later, SEAL fire tore into the position she'd called out. Explosions bloomed, scattering fighters in panic. Carter smiled grimly. Out of ammo, wounded, but still useful. She wasn't just a sniper. Now she was their eyes. Minutes passed in a blur of violence. The SEALs carved through the insurgents, their advance unstoppable. The convoy soldiers rallied, pushing forward to support them. The valley that had been a killing ground an hour ago was transforming into an American stronghold. And through it all, Carter remained on her ridge, bleeding into the dirt, her rifle silent beside her. Her body begged to collapse, but she forced herself to stay alert. She had carried them this far. She wouldn't give in now. The radio crackled again, this time with a voice closer, steadier. Overwatch 3, this is SEAL Team Lead. We've got eyes on your ridge. Hold position. We're coming to you. Carter exhaled, the tension draining from her shoulders. Finally, she allowed herself to sag against the rock. Help was here. The burden was no longer hers alone. As the SEALs pushed deeper, Carter tilted her head back against the stone, closing her eyes for a moment. She thought of those first shots she had fired, of the silence that followed each one, of the lives saved below. She thought of the endless 90 seconds that had stretched into eternity. She had held the line. Against everything. And as the sound of boots crunching on rock grew closer, she finally allowed herself the thought she had denied for hours. She might actually live through this. The valley was no longer the insurgents' hunting ground. It had become their grave. As the first Black Hawks roared overhead and the SEALs hit the ground, the enemy's confidence shattered. What had begun as a perfectly orchestrated ambush now unraveled under the precision and brutality of America's most elite warriors. From her ridge, Emily Carter watched through blurred eyes as the operators fanned out in two disciplined fire teams. Their silhouettes were dark against the smoke, their movements sharp, silent, and utterly lethal. Where the insurgents had relied on chaos and numbers, the SEALs relied on coordination and speed. Each shot was measured. Each grenade was placed with purpose. Where Carter's lone rifle had bought survival one bullet at a time, the SEALs carved wide swaths through the battlefield in minutes. Carter tried to push herself upright, but her body screamed. Blood slicked her sleeve and soaked into the dirt beneath her. Her side throbbed with every breath. For a moment she swayed, her vision darkening at the edges. Her rifle lay beside her, empty, silent. Her hand drifted to it out of instinct, fingers brushing over the worn metal. She felt its weight, the same weapon that had sung for her over the last brutal hour, and whispered, "Not done yet." She forced herself back into position. Not as a shooter, her ammo was gone, but as a spotter. Her scope became her voice. She keyed her radio, her voice hoarse but urgent. Overwatch 3 to SEALs movement north slope, near the caves. Fighters regrouping with heavy weapons. The response came instantly. Copy that, Overwatch. Eyes on, engaging. Seconds later, the ridge she had marked erupted as a SEAL team laid into it, rifles hammering, grenades arcing into cover. Carter saw insurgents scatter, their desperate charge broken before it began. For the first time since the ambush had started, she wasn't alone in holding the line. Down below, the convoy soldiers rallied. Sergeant Daniels barked orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Push forward. Link with the SEALs. Move those wounded, go, go. The men surged, no longer just clinging to survival. They advanced with purpose, covering one another, laying suppressive fire as they dragged the last of the injured to safety. Carter could hear their renewed energy even from above, shouts sharp, movements fast, fear replaced with determination. The valley that had felt like a tomb minutes ago was suddenly alive with momentum. But the insurgents weren't finished. From the mouth of the largest cave, a final wave emerged, dozens of fighters, carrying heavier weapons, shouting in defiance. RPGs gleamed on their shoulders, machine guns braced across rocks. This was no retreat. It was a last stand, an attempt to overwhelm the Americans with sheer ferocity. Carter's chest tightened. She had seen that kind of desperation before. A cornered enemy fought hardest. Her trembling hands steadied her scope. Overwatch 3 to all teams, multiple hostiles. Main cave entrance, heavily armed. Copy, Overwatch, came the SEAL leader's reply. His voice was calm, almost cold. We'll take it from here. The response was immediate. One SEAL team advanced low, rifles crackling in sharp bursts, while the other flanked wide, moving like shadows along the rocks. A Black Hawk swooped low, its door gun spitting fire into the cave mouth, tearing apart the fighters trying to set up heavy weapons. The ground shook as a grenade launcher fired, shells slamming into the enemy position, scattering bodies and debris. The insurgents tried to rally, screaming orders, waving rifles. But against the precision of the SEALs, it was hopeless. Carter could only watch, all mixing with exhaustion. She had faced the valley's fury alone, holding back wave after wave. But this was overwhelming force. This was what the enemy had feared when they planned their ambush. The SEALs were not just soldiers. They were executioners of inevitability. Minutes stretched into eternity. The insurgents fought with everything they had, charging, firing, screaming. But each push was cut down, each position dismantled. One by one, their weapons went silent. One by one, their bodies fell. Carter tracked them through her scope, calling out the last stragglers, guiding fire to the ones who tried to slip away. She didn't need ammo now. Her voice was a weapon. Her eyes were sharper than bullets. And slowly, silence crept back into the valley. The smoke hung thick, curling upward into the fading sky. Fires smoldered in wrecked vehicles. The metallic stench of blood carried on the breeze. But the gunfire tapered off and stopped altogether. It was over. Carter slumped back against the rock, her body trembling. She pressed a hand against her side, feeling the sticky warmth of her own blood. Her cheek stung where shrapnel had torn her skin. Every muscle ached. She had never felt so heavy, so drained. But she was alive. And so were the men below. Overwatch 3, this is SEAL Lead, the radio cracked. Ridge secure. We're coming to you now. Sit tight. Carter let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. Copy, she rasped. Her throat was raw, her lips cracked, but the word carried. She lowered her rifle at last, letting it rest against the dirt. Her hands trembled without its weight. For hours, it had been her lifeline, her voice, her only defense. Now, it was just a piece of steel and wood. Her eyes fluttered shut for a moment. Memories of the fight surged, each shot, each scream, each explosion. She forced them back, focusing only on the sound of boots climbing toward her. Minutes later, shadows appeared above her. SEAL operators crested the ridge, weapons still raised, scanning for threats. One broke formation, moving to her side. His voice was calm, but carried authority. "Staff Sergeant Carter?" Her eyes cracked open. She nodded weakly. "Damn," he muttered, kneeling beside her. "You held this whole ridge by yourself?" Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Seemed better than letting everyone die." The SEAL shook his head, almost in disbelief, then keyed his radio. "We've got her. She's alive. Repeat, Overwatch 3 is alive." 2 SEALs moved quickly, tending to her wounds, applying pressure bandages, lifting her gently onto a stretcher. She resisted for a moment, eyes darting back to her rifle. "Don't worry," one operator said, picking it up carefully. "We'll bring it." Her eyes softened, and she let herself sink back. As they carried her down the ridge, the battlefield spread out below, Americans regrouping, wounded being loaded into medevac choppers, SEALs sweeping the last caves for survivors. The valley was quiet now, save for the hum of engines and the murmur of men who had survived the unthinkable. Carter closed her eyes, the stretcher swaying gently as they descended. For the first time since the ambush began, she let go of her vigilance. Others could hold the line now. She had done her part, and as the ridge receded above her, she knew one truth with absolute certainty. The battle had turned. Not because of overwhelming firepower, not because of reinforcements, not even because of the SEAL's lethal precision. It had turned the moment she pulled the trigger for the first time and refused to stop. The valley was finally still. For hours it had echoed with gunfire, explosions, and the cries of men fighting for their lives. Now, only the steady thrum of helicopter blades and the low murmur of soldiers broke the silence. Smoke curled from burned-out vehicles, drifting toward the evening sky. The sun dipped behind jagged mountains, staining the horizon crimson as if the earth itself still bled. Emily Carter lay on a stretcher near the convoy, her body heavy with exhaustion, her uniform soaked in dried blood and dust. Her eyes fluttered open and closed, struggling to stay present, but she forced herself awake. She didn't want to lose this moment, the first quiet after a storm she had thought would never end. Medics hovered over her, checking vitals, changing dressings, injecting painkillers. The sting in her side dulled, though not completely. She hated the weakness that came with surrendering her body to their care, but she could no longer deny it. She had given everything she had on that ridge. There was nothing left to fight with except her will. Sergeant Daniels appeared, his face streaked with grime and soot, one arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage. He crouched beside her, resting a calloused hand on her shoulder. "Staff Sergeant," he said quietly, his voice rough. "I don't know if you can hear me, but you saved us. Every damn one of us down there owes you our lives." Carter blinked up at him, lips twitching into the faintest smile. "Just doing my job," she whispered. Daniels shook his head, eyes burning with something beyond exhaustion. "That wasn't just your job. That was impossible. And you did it anyway." Nearby, the SEAL team regrouped, their leader reporting into a satellite radio. Carter caught fragments of his words. Ambush repelled. Convoy secured. Significant casualties prevented. Each clipped syllable felt like validation, proof that her struggle on the ridge hadn't been swallowed by the chaos. One of the operators approached her stretcher. He was tall, his gear coated in dust, his helmet dangling loosely at his side. He looked down at her with the cool appraisal of a man accustomed to measuring others in battle. "You held the ridge?" he asked simply. Carter nodded faintly. His lips pressed into a thin line that might have been the edge of a smile. "Hell of a thing. You bought us the time we needed. Without you, we'd be pulling bodies out of this valley instead of survivors." There was no exaggeration in his tone, no hollow compliment. Just fact. And somehow, that struck deeper than any praise could. As night crept in, the valley transformed into an evacuation zone. Helicopters came and went, ferrying the wounded to field hospitals. Soldiers gathered in clusters, sharing water, lighting small fires, speaking in hushed tones. Their eyes often lifted toward the ridge where Carter had fought, as though it had become something more than rock and dirt, something sacred. Carter watched them from her stretcher, her mind drifting. She remembered every shot, every shift of her scope, every desperate breath as the enemy closed in. The fear, the pain, the overwhelming weight of being alone. But she also remembered the moment she decided she wouldn't quit, no matter what it cost. That choice had carried her here, to this fragile silence. Later, she was lifted into a medevac helicopter, its interior cramped with stretchers and medics. As the bird lifted off, the valley shrank beneath her. Fires glowed like embers scattered across the ground. Vehicles looked like broken toys. The ridge rose above it all, jagged and defiant, a silhouette against the night. Carter pressed her head back against the stretcher, tears stinging her eyes. Not for herself, not even for the wounds she bore, but for the men alive below, because she had refused to let the valley consume them. The helicopter rocked in the wind, but she felt a calm settle over her at last. Days later, she awoke in a field hospital, her body stitched and bandaged, 4 lines running into her veins. The sterile smell of antiseptic replaced the acrid smoke of battle. The white walls and soft hum of machines were alien after the chaos of the valley. Visitors came. Commanders, medics, even some of the convoy soldiers she had saved. Each one told her their version of the story, what it had looked like from below, the shock of hearing her shots ring out, the disbelief that one sniper could turn the tide. She listened quietly, never boasting, never correcting. The truth was simple. She had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. Weeks later, when she was strong enough to stand, a small ceremony was held at the forward operating base. Soldiers lined up in dusty fatigues, their faces solemn. The SEAL team stood at the front, silent but present, their respect clear in their stillness. A commander stepped forward, reading her citation aloud. Words like valor, courage, and sacrifice filled the air. Then came the metal pin to her uniform as cameras clicked. But the moment that stayed with Carter wasn't the medal or the applause. It was the quiet murmur that rippled through the ranks, the unspoken acknowledgement among soldiers. She saved us. That truth mattered more than any decoration. Later that night, alone in her quarters, Carter sat with a rifle propped beside her. Cleaned, repaired, polished, it no longer bore the scars of that day. But she remembered how it had felt in her hands on the ridge, the weight of it an anchor against despair. She ran her fingers over the steel, whispering softly, "We made it." Her reflection stared back from the dull metal surface older, wearier, but stronger too. She knew the battle would never truly leave her. The valley's silence would echo in her dreams for years to come. But she also knew something else, something stronger. When it mattered most, she had not broken. And because of that, others still lived. Months later, when the story spread through the ranks and reached back home, it was often told with the same refrain. They called the SEALs. But before backup arrived, her sniper rifle roared from the ridge. It became legend, not because of the medal or the ceremony, but because soldiers who had been there carried it in their hearts. They remembered the single set of gunshots above them when all hope seemed lost. They remembered the lone figure on the ridge who refused to yield. Emily Carter didn't think of herself as a hero. Heroes were myths, she believed, stories people told to make sense of chaos. She was a soldier who made a choice. But in the silence after the valley, the world chose to remember her differently. And so, long after the smoke cleared and the battlefield healed, the story endured. The ridge stood unchanged, wind cutting across its stones. But for those who had been there, it would never again be just a ridge. It was a reminder of one sniper's defiance, of courage carved into rock and memory. It was proof that sometimes, in the darkest moments, a single rifle, a single heartbeat, and a single will could turn the tide of war. And in that silence, Emily Carter's name lived on.